I'm so excited to be here with everyone. I've been called the sales therapist by one of the lecturers at Harvard Business School. And it's funny because I've also done a lot of coaching at Harvard Business School. And if you have heard that I've written a book called Buyer First, I write about that experience in there. But I'm also president or chair of the Boston Association of Inside Sale Professionals, which is also called Emblaze. And as you'll see in today's presentation, I do a lot of digging into the data behind sales performance and as well as the psychology. So I'm excited to share all of that with you today. Jon, I'm super excited that you're here with me as well.
Well, Carole, first, I just want to thank you for joining our Nimble community to share some of your wisdom. I think we met over 10 years ago, where as I started to dance in social media and identify people that really shined and resonated with me in and around my passions of sales and marketing and social, you really stood out, Carole, not just for your wisdom and knowledge in pushing the edges of sales, but for your humanness. And that's what I look for in people that really shine to me as a wonderful human being. So thank you for coming and joining us. For those that don't know me, I'm Jon Ferrara. I like to build relationship systems. I do it because I like to power others. And I just am grateful for all those that joined me on this journey. And with that, Carole, I think that we're ready to rock and roll, and you could take it away. Before that, I just want to remind everybody to ask questions. We'll be answering those in the background. And Carole, if you want my input at all anywhere, let me know. And if it's okay, if I kibitz in once or twice, just because I'm so passionate about what you're saying, I hope that's okay.
Oh, please do. I mean, honestly, I'm hoping that this is a conversation with us, with everybody who's joining us today. So please type into the chat pane, type into the question pane. We're going to be answering those both as we go and at the end. I really want this to be something that you take something away from, however small, that you can start applying today, tomorrow with your team. So with that, and Jon, thank you so much too for the kind words. Whenever I get to talk with Jon, I always end up coming home to my husband and telling him about the conversation. So I've already told him that you want to cook for us, so he's pretty excited about that. But today we're going to talk about how do you, as an entrepreneur, business owner, or a salesperson working remotely or in a hybrid environment, how do you sell successfully today? And what are the strategies that we can use to start changing both the beliefs and mindsets that we have towards the actions in sales, as well as adopting the identified skills that are necessary to bring value to our buyers? Because as our poll suggests, there are things that buyers value, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is. Personalization is definitely one of the top things, as is new ideas, but we'll get to that in a moment. And then with this, I want to also help you to start asking the right kinds of questions, to start collaborating with your buyers on specific solutions. Because what buyers place value on is exactly that. They want personalization, customization. And you've all probably heard of before the IKEA store. Actually, the place where you get furniture and you put it together yourself. Harvard did a study on the IKEA store, and what they found in that study was interesting, because what they learned was that buyers place value on things that they've had a part in co-creating, in creating themselves, or that someone has created for them. It is just like them. They found it more credible, and because they found it more credible, they were willing to pay more for it. So in other words, when you and your team have collaborative conversations with your buyers, they place more value on that conversation. Another study that was done of over 500 B2B buyers suggested that they place more value on conversations that are collaborative and help them to look at things differently. They want new ideas. They already know what they know. They want to know, what is it that I don't know? Because a lot of times the problems that our buyers are facing are sometimes the first times they've had to deal with this. As sales professionals, we need to be the ones that can step in and bridge the gaps between their knowledge and help them to make decisions. When we collaborate to explore options and diagnose together, then we're making recommendations based on what we've learned with our buyers, both what they need and don't need. This is the IKEA effect at work in our sales conversations. We'll acquire more of the right fit types of buyers. We're going to get more referrals. We're going to close more business at a higher value and blow past our quotas when we embrace the IKEA effect, or the collaborative selling dynamic in our sales conversations. Because if you look up the definition of sales in the Webster's Dictionary, it is an exchange of value. That is the literal definition of sales. And that is why I often say that selling is not something that we do to others people. It is something that we do with them. But there are things that get in our way of doing that. Things that are hidden things, maybe in our way or in our team members' way of being able to successfully collaborate with our buyers. To do this type of collaborative conversation with buyers and with your team members, to sell with them, to help them to make decisions and take actions, there are 5 mindsets that we measure that act as hidden obstacles to be able to actively listen, ask good, thought-provoking questions, challenge our buyers, and ask for their business. It's like trying to lose weight. Now, one of the things that I write about in the book is that just before the pandemic, I went on a weight loss journey or health journey that led to me losing 105 pounds. Now, prior to this, and maybe some of you can relate, I tried everything to lose the weight. I tried Weight Watchers, the South Beach diet, the Zone diet. Anyone else remember that shake diet that tasted like cake batter that you had a couple of times a day? Yeah, I tried that one too. I tried everything, and sometimes the weight came off, but typically came right back on within a year, and sometimes even more weight. Kind of like how we've tried all types of sales techniques and processes and programs, hoping that this is going to be the one that turns it all around for us. Maybe you know, or you think you know what to say, or we all know, for example, that we need to eat vegetables and exercise in order to be healthy and lose weight. But when we're hungry, or when we're up against the wall for a quota or to make our numbers, and we're faced with that pepperoni pizza or that discount that we're tempted to give our buyer to get them to incentivize them, everything that we know to do goes out the window. It wasn't until I started to become aware of and start taking small steps to change the mindsets that I had towards weight loss that I actually lost the weight and have kept it off for 4 years now. The science of behavior change tells us that our attitudes and what we consider to be normal behavior forms our intentions to do something. And therefore, that's how we get our behaviors and results. How we think becomes what we do, becomes the results that we get. And what's been considered normal sales behavior, well, now you can probably actually understand why the majority of buyers today see salespeople as pushy, slimy, and sleazy. And maybe somewhere in your mind, you think that too. I know I used to. But when we begin to master our attitudes and change our beliefs and change our intentions by adopting new behaviors, by putting our buyers first, they will see us as collaborative, as trustworthy, as thought-provoking, and trust us to advise them. How we think about the sales behaviors we have to do is going to help us or hinder us in the moments we need to do them. This is often why what seems to work for everyone else maybe doesn't work for you, or why we try every technique under the sun, because so much of sales training is focused on what to do, not on these hidden obstacles and mindsets that get in the way. Now, in my work with clients, I use data from 2.3 million sales professionals to analyze these different belief systems and mindsets and how they impact different sales skill sets. One of the things that data showed me is that the most successful salespeople have these mindsets in common, but only 7% of salespeople out of 2.3 million have them, which means there's a lot of room for performance improvement. Now, these psychological tendencies that we're going to dig into don't just happen to sales conversations with buyers. They also impact you in your everyday conversations with your family, your friends, or even your team. So, how do we start digging into these particular things? We're going to start digging into these types of mindsets as we go through a typical sales process from discovery to qualification to closing. And in each of these phases, I'm going to show you both what are the questions, the collaborative questions that we need to ask, as well as what are the mindsets that get in the way of us doing that, how to recognize them, and how to start changing them. So let's start with our discovery conversation. And as we're going, type into the chat pane, I'm curious for everyone here in the questions pane or chat pane, what you think the goal of a discovery conversation will be. Go ahead and type your answer into the chat. I'm curious to hear or see what everyone thinks there. Now, as we start getting into this, the first contact that we have with a buyer is initially called that discovery conversation. Sometimes the questions that we ask in these discovery conversations can be asked in web forms or automated emails. But the answers here are important because they will not only help you understand what they think they want to buy, but it also gives you clues as to the level of their indecision or how they went about looking for the answers that they're asking. With the answers to these questions, such as, how did they find me? Now, this might seem like a very simple kind of a throwaway question, but how they find you is actually how you understand how they began their buying process. So for example, let's say that they found you through a referral or an introduction. Oftentimes I will ask, well, what were you and Jon talking about when my name came up? That gives me an understanding of what triggered the conversation to talk with me. This is the very beginning. Or maybe they filled out a web form and you can ask about the information that they filled out there. Or maybe they responded to an outbound message. What was it in that message that resonated with you that we need to dig into? This is a very important question, but often a question that gets overlooked because it seems like just a simple throwaway, not realizing that it's actually the very first step. The next question that we often ask in the discovery process is, how long have they been looking? I very rarely see this question get asked in any way, because how long they've been looking for something and how long they've been trying to decide gives you a sense of their level of indecision or what's gotten in their way of being able to solve this problem in the past, and how might they overcome that now. And then that final question is, why are they even looking? Is there an impending event that's happening? How did they become aware of this particular issue? What research is it that they've done? Why do they think it's an issue at all to begin with? With the answers to these questions, which can go relatively quickly, and you may not even need to ask them all, and there's several more questions that you could ask. These are just some basic ones. But with the answers to these, then you can recommend to them what direction might make the most sense for us to go in and look at solutions. But these questions aren't getting asked by the majority of sellers. In fact, what happens is that as soon as they start to identify a pain point, they get really excited. And then they wonder, why are buyers ignoring me? Like, after this first discovery call we've had this great conversation and now they won't respond to me. How does that happen? Why does that happen? Well, what's happening is, while we're in that conversation, in that first discovery conversation, we start to hear those pain points, those things like, oh, yeah, they do have a problem that I can solve. I know exactly what I need to pitch them. And suddenly we're talking to ourselves in our heads, we're losing our objectivity, and what's happening is that we're not actively listening anymore because we've become emotionally involved in the conversation. We're hearing buying signals, or maybe it's later in the conversation, we're hearing objections. This seems complicated, this seems expensive, and now suddenly we're trying to figure out a way to justify or defend our stance to win them over. If you find that your buyers are ignoring you after that first discovery call, or they're not listening to the advice that you're giving them, it could be because you have this idea of, how is this going to impact me? We're so focused on how it's going to impact me and I'm making it all about ourselves that we're forgetting that it's the buyer who matters here. If you've seen any of my social media pictures, you've probably seen me with a t-shirt on that has this upside down phrase on it that says, not about me. And it's upside down so that the person who's wearing the t-shirt can be reminded it's not about them. It's about the buyer and their needs. Because the reality is that 63% of those 2.3 million sales professionals struggle with emotional involvement during the sales process, which is relatively easy to understand because there's finances on the line, there's quotas, there's jobs to be saved. These are the things that come down and causes this emotional involvement. But what then happens is we're not actively listening, and that is one of the #1 traits that buyers are looking for in salespeople today. Tell me and show me that you're actually listening to me and you're not just going through your checklist of things. So how do we know, or how do you know if this is something that you are struggling with? How do you know that you're getting emotionally involved? Well, you can recognize some of the symptoms in your everyday life. For example, do you get bored easily? One of my sons is one of those people who needs constant distraction. He's always kind of wrapped up in what's going on in his own little world. And as a result, it finds that he gets bored easily. He's always looking for that next screen time, that next stimulation. And he's not in the actual present moment. He's trying to distract himself from it. Another symptom that's common to see where someone is getting emotionally involved is, do you have a hard time remembering people's names? My husband and I, when we first started dating, I didn't know the names of at least I think all of his friends, because he had such a hard time remembering people's names that when he would first meet them, he would give them a nickname that he could remember. So as a result, I didn't know what the actual names were for any of the people that he hung out with because they were just, Joey so-and-so. It was really quite frustrating, but it also cued me in as to what happens with salespeople when we can't remember names. It's because we're wrapped up in our own minds. Or, this is one that happens to me, do you often find yourself driving somewhere and forget how you got there because you're thinking of something or you're wrapped up in your mind about something? These are the clues that tell you in your everyday life whether you're most likely to get emotionally involved in your sales conversations. So what do you do about it? How do you manage the very human need of making sure that people see you? Now, first thing that you can do to start managing your emotions is self-care. Now, self-care is one of those things that we're starting to talk a lot about more in sales today. And the reason is because stress is one of those things that causes us to start getting wrapped up in our heads. The emotional involvement makes us check out. Stress is one of those things that can be caused by financial issues. It can be caused by economic issues. It can just be caused by personal issues. So managing your self-care with things like daily meditation practice. I was actually coaching some Harvard students earlier this week, and one of them had shared with me how nervous she gets before she goes into these kinds of sales conversations. And so one of the things that I suggested to her was start a meditation practice. Even if you only do 5 minutes of mindful breathing before you get onto a sales conversation, it will lower your heart rate, it will lower your stress levels, and it will actually help you to calm your mind so that you can be in the present moment and think of the questions that you need to ask your buyers. And then one last one is eliminate distractions in your day-to-day. I mentioned my son earlier and how he was always looking for the next distraction. But the thing to do is to start turning off your notifications, your email, your Slack, your social media notifications. And reducing those will allow you to start slowing down in your day-to-day. That's what will help you to be comfortable being in the present moment. So I noticed that we have a question here, and that question is, if I'm working with a team, how can I motivate other team members to have the right mindset? I love this question. Now, one of the things that you can do to help encourage your team to have the right mindsets is to make sure that you have them yourself. Put your own oxygen mask on first. In sales managers, when they have non-supportive beliefs and mindsets, they are more likely to pass those on to their team at a rate of 355%. 355% more likely that your team member holds certain mindsets because you hold those mindsets. So when you start to change those things, your relationships with them will also change. For example, in managers, when they get emotionally involved in things, when they get into a coaching conversation, instead of asking questions to help their coachee come to a realization, they tend to start telling them things. You need to do this, you need to do that, because they can't let a deal go south because they're worried about how it's going to impact them. So if you're a manager and you're finding that your team is struggling, start with yourself to be the example to them. Because the other side of the analysis that I did of managers and the teams that reported to them, yes, 355%, they'll likely get those negative beliefs. But when you hold those positive beliefs, you're 1,000% more likely to pass those on to your teams, and that is what is going to help them to perform better. Another way that you can start to help your team or motivate them is to start asking them, like say, for example, when you're doing a call review, tell me what was going through your mind in the moment in this call, and how did that cause you to miss this question? Start to get them aware of the situations when maybe they're getting wrapped up in their heads by doing call reviews and asking them those types of questions. So thank you so much for that question. Keep asking those questions and putting them in. We'll address them as we go and also at the end. Now, once we've gotten through the discovery phase, we've got some strategies in place to now start being able to manage our emotions in the moment. This is going to be something that is a work in progress. You won't master it overnight, so start with something small. But let's go in and talk about the qualification stage. What happens in qualifying? Why do we qualify? What is it that we're qualifying for? In this stage of our conversations, we really need to be examining our buyer's willingness to make a decision or understand how compelling their goals are. Yes, qualification is about authority and budget and timing and all of those kinds of things, but I think the thing that we forget is qualification is also, are we the right fit for them, and are they the right fit for us, and qualifying on their ability and willingness to make the decision. This goes back to why do people delay their buying decisions, which we're also talking about in a moment. So what are the questions? What are the pillar questions that we need to be asking to qualify with people? First is, well, what is it that they're working on, or what is it that they want to work on? What do they hope to gain from this particular solution? And that's an easy question to ask, but a lot of times we make assumptions. Well, because you're this type of company and you're having this type of problem, then must be what the thing is that you need to work on. Instead, even if we know the answer, ask them the question. Remember, we want them to collaborate with us. One of the things about these types of questions, even though they seem simple, these open-ended sequential questions helps you to better understand your buyer. But the thing that happens is that when your buyers are answering these types of questions, it's releasing dopamine in their brains. We love to talk about what we think and what we know and what our opinions are of certain things. And when we do that, we release dopamine in our brains. And that is also the same place where we form trust and bonds and connection. So when we ask people more questions about themselves and what they think, then they start to build more trust with us. And the other side of this is that when people answer these kinds of questions, they start to change their own minds. So even if you think you know the answer to these questions for your buyer, ask them, because we want them to start changing their own minds for themselves. It's almost like when you talk out a problem with one of your friends and you've talked through the whole problem. They haven't had to say a single word. And by the end of the conversation, when you've done all of the talking, you've figured it out for yourself. It's kind of like that. All right, the next question. Who else does this impact? What else does this impact? What is the impact of this particular issue within your organization if it doesn't get solved? And on the positive side, what would happen when it does get solved? What's your perceived hope for the future? What's the vision of success look like? And then finally, what obstacles might prevent you from being able to do this? Remember that question in the beginning of the discovery conversation? How long have you been looking for a solution on this? What are the obstacles that might stand in your way of being able to implement this solution? Is it IT? Is it legal? Is it budgets? How will we work through those particular obstacles for this very compelling issue that you've just shared with me? Now, with these questions and following these answers, this is likely the time for you to start to make a recommendation. Whether that recommendation is we're not a good fit for what you need, or you're not the best fit for us. And also, what they initially came to you for might not be the thing that they actually need. Your offering might not be the right fit, or their idea of the solution might not be the right solution for them. This is where you need to be able to challenge them, to push back on what they're saying and thinking, because it's not in their best interest. Now, in order to challenge the way that people are thinking about things, we need to have the supportive mindset for that. Now, if you haven't asked these collaborative questions, it's going to be very difficult for you to push back on anything. Maybe people ask the first question, but again, it's those further drill down questions that aren't getting asked. On average, by the way, it takes about 7 to 9 questions for people to start to get to a place where they've started to uncover new information. It's also about the amount of time that people are willing to answer those kinds of questions. So what is happening in our own minds when we're chickening out from asking these challenging questions? Well, buyers aren't trusting us. They won't share information with us. And the reason that they won't share information with us is because we're always telling them what they want to hear. Oh, can you do this part of things? Well, yes, of course we can do that. And we can do this, and we can do that, and we can do this, and we can do that. And because we're saying yes to everything and not pushing back, they're not finding it easy to trust us. This is what happens when we tell people what they want to hear. I mean, who really trusts the yes person? The mindset that's getting in the way of them being able to do that is approval seeking. When we seek approval and validation from our buyers because we believe that people need to like us in order to buy from us, and if they don't like us, they won't buy from us, is only partially true. Yes, you can't be a jerk, or people aren't going to want to hear the message that you have to say. But if you're always trying to appease and please people, they're not going to be able to trust you because you're not telling them what it is that they need to hear, not just what they want to hear. So what are some of the other issues that go on with this? And oh yeah, by the way, 60% of sales professionals struggle with the need for approval. They struggle to push back on their buyers, to challenge the way that they're thinking about things, or to even offer insights into something that maybe they hadn't considered before, because we're so worried to upset people. So what are some of the symptoms of this? How do you know if you or your team member is struggling with the need for approval? Now, if you're a sales manager here, your struggle with the need for approval means that you might chicken out from those tough conversations with your sales team or holding them accountable. I've had a lot of sales managers that I've worked with that feel that their team needs to like them in order for them to be able to work with them. But the problem is again, we don't trust the people who won't push back on us. Now, one of the symptoms that you find in people who are seeking approval is they feel guilty for setting boundaries or for saying no. I know I've been guilty of this where I haven't set proper boundaries, or I've said yes because I always want to be so helpful. But what happens is that you're, one, overextending yourself, but two, no one really knows what you stand for when you don't set boundaries. So practice in your everyday life setting boundaries with others, saying no more often, but not with your boss. Don't start by saying no to your boss. Maybe something small, like maybe your significant other wants to watch yet another wartime movie and you just want to say no. Okay, maybe that's just me, but still find small ways in your everyday life to say no. Don't go right out and say no to your boss. Another symptom is that maybe you find yourself comparing yourself to others. I know when I published my book, I was a little bit obsessive about looking and comparing my book to everybody else's book that came out that week. How come I don't have enough reviews? How come I don't have this? How come I don't have that? And what happens is that we then start seeking approval from places and things that aren't the places where we should be seeking them. The only place that we should be seeking approval from are those in our immediate family and loved ones. Those are the relationships that matter, and approval matters. And then finally, one of the most common symptoms I see when people are seeking approval from others is that we agree with people even when we don't agree with people. And that happens, you see it happen in politics every day. You see it happen in conversations every day because we don't want to cause a stir. Standing up for what you believe in tactically will help you to combat any need for approval that you have. Instead, seek your approval from the places that matter. How do we manage this? How do we overcome this very human need of approval? I mean, if you think about it, we were hardwired since we were children to seek approval, because when we were babies and we did something, the first thing we did was look to our parents to see if we did it right. And when we're venturing out into something new, whether that's a new job or a new role or a new business, anytime we try to do something risky, that is when we start to seek approval. All right, let's look at the strategies for managing this need for approval. How do we start to get over this ourselves? Say no more often. But as I said, maybe not to your boss, but find some place small where you can say no to something. Maybe it's the movie. Maybe it's your kids who want to have you drive them to yet one more place. Say no more often and feel okay saying no. Reduce the amount of time you're spending on social media. I know that was one of the things that I had to learn, is I had to reduce the amount of days or times that I would be on social media. And I've actually set myself up with a discipline. I actually put it in my calendar twice a day. Check social media, respond to certain things. I have specific tasks that I'm going to do there. Because if you're like me, you go onto LinkedIn to do some research and all of a sudden you're 15 miles away from what you actually started to do there. So be very intentional and very disciplined about how you use your social media time. Otherwise, it will just start spiraling that need for approval like gas to a flame. Speak up. Disagree with people more, obviously tactfully. Share your thoughts and opinions in a non-threatening and non-judgmental way, and openly disagree and say, you know what, I don't agree with that. I actually had an instance where I had to do this with my own family, where they were having a conversation around some type of an issue, and I'm like, I don't agree. I think that that's the wrong way to think about these things. And guess what? We still got along afterwards. Everything was still fine. All right, we're going to move on to the closing part, but I see that we have a question here from Matthew. How can we use this wonderful information to help Jon grow Nimble and $1 million SaaS? This is a way for your book to help achieve the results we're looking to achieve. As an expert in joint ventures, collaborative selling, and so forth, there is a three-way collaboration potential arising from this call right now. Yes, to your question, Matthew, yes, of course, there's a way for you to supplement this type of growth. Of course, it can apply with Jon and Nimble. But here's the thing of it, is that collaborative growth is something that buyers are demanding. It's not just the latest fad. People actually want to be collaborated with today. And I think that as salespeople, we do not give our buyers enough credit as to how much they know about their own issues. I think there's still this mindset that we need to tell people what they need to know, but the internet has changed that dynamic for sure. And by the way, Matthew, a lot of the stories that are in the Buyer First book are based on or from SaaS-based companies as well as professional services companies. So it absolutely should apply. Now, let's talk about the close. When does the close start anyway? I promise that this is not a trick question. Actually, it's to confirm this is what the close is about. It is not the time to sell through the proposal. It is not the time to pull out your best negotiation tactics. It is the time to confirm that you have covered all the bases, that you have dotted the I's, you have crossed the T's. This is not the time to have your proposal sell for you by wrapping it all up in a nice, neat little bow. In fact, the proposal is something that you should also be collaboratively creating with your buyers. The close starts the moment that you open your mouth and you say hello, or when they engage with your brand online, or your company, or your salesperson. When I coach sellers how to close, it is still a collaboration. Now, these questions actually come from a book called Baseline Selling, written by Dave Kerwin, who's the founder of Objective Management Group, which is where I get all of that data from. Now, Dave calls this the inoffensive close. I call it the natural close, and it is still a collaborative process. The very first question when you think it is time to ask for the business is to ask this question: do I understand everything about you and your situation? You could also ask this on a scale of 1 to 7. How much do you feel, or how confident are you that I understand everything about your situation? Now, here's the thing. If you get a, yeah, I guess it's a 6, or yeah, I think so. If it's not an affirmation in the positive, you need to dig into what's missing. What is there that I still should know? What do you feel is missing from the conversation so far? What piece of information are you looking for that you haven't found yet that makes you feel confident that we understand what you're going through? They may not have an answer for that, but that is going to be one of the places where you know that this might cause a delay later on if they're unsure, if the risk in their mind is still too great. The second question: do you believe that we have the solution, the expertise to help? And again, if it's anything other than a resounding yes, you need to stop and dig into that and go back, find out what it is that you've missed. Then the third and the final question is, do you want our help? Are you ready to move forward with us, and what that looks like? Now, a lot of times people will leave this off to some other conversation. They try to do it through email, but I highly recommend that you do this. And it may be, depending on your sales process, something that you have to do with each stakeholder in the business. If you have multiple people involved in this decision-making process, everyone's going to have a slightly different answer, but everyone's contributing to whether or not they can say yes or no. All right, what is it that gets in the way of asking these questions? What happens when your buyers say, well, I need to think it over, and you don't push back, you don't drill down into more questions, you don't explore what that might be? When that happens and buyers delay their decisions, it's often because we're accepting those stalls and put-offs. You know what? If they think it over, they will eventually buy from me. Or maybe they think I need to have the best price in order to someone to buy from me. When those types of beliefs and behaviors are happening, it's what we call a non-supportive buy cycle, or what I like to call the how you buy is how you sell dynamic. What happens is that because of the way we make buying decisions, we project that onto our buyers, and we accept the excuses and the delays of needing to think it over, or we believe that I have to have the best price in order for them to buy from me. These are the things that get in the way of 73% of salespeople being able to effectively close business. So how do we know, or how do you know, whether or not the way you buy is getting in the way of how you sell? How do you know if you have the bad kind of empathy with your buyers when they say, I want to think it over, and you think, yeah, I get it. I would need to think it over too. You'll eventually come back and buy. They don't though, do they? So how do you recognize it? Ask yourself, do I need to do a lot of researching and comparison before I make a decision? Maybe you're like one of my friends who had this very complicated matrix-based sales sort of Excel spreadsheet that he used to calculate whether or not he was going to make a very simple purchase decision for his home. I mean, I think he spent 1.5 years with this spreadsheet trying to make a decision and did tons of comparison, was looking at every feature, and anytime something new would come onto the market, he would throw that into his Excel spreadsheet calculation. 1.5 years for him to decide one small component of his house. I couldn't believe it. Or maybe you delay your decision because you're afraid of making the wrong one. I actually had a former friend of mine, note the former part, who was late for everything, because he hadn't decided on what kind of socks to wear. Every single time we had something that we needed to do, he would be late because he couldn't decide on socks. Socks! Yes, hence the former part. But if you're someone who also delays making decisions and then your buyers want to do the same thing, yeah, sure, I would do the same thing. Okay, do you need everyone else's opinion or validation before you can make a decision? My mother-in-law was one of those people, whenever we would go out for dinner, she would ask everyone at the table. It didn't matter if there was 3 people or 20 people. Every single person would have to answer her what they had chosen off of the menu. And seemingly you would think it would help her to decide, but she still ordered the exact same thing she ordered every single time: haddock, baked potato, and broccoli. If you're someone who, like my mother-in-law, has to ask everybody else's opinion or get validation before you make a decision, then when your buyers need to do more due diligence or they need to compare more things, then certainly you can understand that. So how do we start to change that dynamic so that we can actually help our buyers to make decisions or qualify them out that they're not willing to make the decision? Start with something small and low risk. I'm not saying go out and impulsively buy a car or a house or any major purchase like that. But maybe you're like my mother-in-law and we start with something small like how you choose a dinner at a menu at a restaurant. If we use that example, then maybe you give yourself a deadline as to what it is that you're going to order. Say you give yourself 2 minutes. And you're not allowed to ask anybody else what it is that they're having. Instead, limit yourself to 3 options and choose from within those 3 options. One of the things that I would do is if I knew I was going to a restaurant, I would look at the menu ahead of time and choose 3 things from the menu that I was going to consider for when I got there, which made it easier for me to choose healthy things, but then it also made it easier for me to make that decision because I was limiting the number of options to choose from. This is how you can do that. All right, let's talk about some of the questions that we have, and then we'll see what it is that we want to start with. So one of the questions, how and when can I add personalization to the sale? So adding the personalization to the sale, this is what you should be doing in your research before you even get onto the conversation with your buyer. I can't tell you how many times I roll my eyes when I hear sales calls that start with, so tell me about your business, or tell me about your role, how are you measured? These are things that you can find with a very simple Google search that you can then use to personalize your approach to this particular buyer. Another thing about personalization is it is more about their role and how they think of things than it is, the personalization in terms of the first name, the last name, the company name. Personalization is really about asking these kinds of open-ended questions to find out the information that you can use to then personalize to them. So for example, if you have, I'm going to use Nimble as an example. There are a lot of great features within Nimble that you can use. One of my favorite ones is the social listening aspect, because it is so difficult when I'm doing research before a call to then go into each of the social media profiles that somebody may or may not have. The social listening tools within Nimble make it easier for me because then I can see what it is that they're talking about in their conversations. What are some of the things that they're sharing in their content? Or even start to look at where have they spoken, what things have they spoken about. That then allows me to personalize my approach to them in outreach, but then also personalize my conversation with them in the questions that I'm asking. So for example, if you found out that someone has just given an interview and they were talking about the way that investors are looking for product market fit today over rapid growth, and you're talking with that person later today, and you can say, you know what, I really appreciated what you said about the product market fit, because I find too often that growth is sacrificed because of a poor product market fit. And I would be curious to hear how you see that happening in today's SaaS world. So personalizing is really about using your research, I feel, to create targeted questions that will be specific to that person and that conversation. So go deeper in your research, find out what makes this person tick, and ask questions that are targeted around that then ask for their opinions on particular things. Great question there. Thank you so much for sharing that one, Jenna. All right, so I'm curious for everyone here, what will you start with? Is it the questions that you need to map out, or what strategy have you recognized as something that you can start implementing in your day-to-day in order to be able to start to shift how you see your sales interactions? Type those into the chat pane or the question pane for me if you would. And while you're at it, please, I invite you to pick up a copy of the Buy Your First book. There are a ton more questions, more strategies in here, and much more research on what it is that buyers value and how to structure personalization and frameworks and how you should ask these questions in an everyday conversation. I give examples in there of actual conversations and the flow of that conversation, as well as more questions on how to brainstorm those. And if you do purchase a book, please make sure on that link that you click on to sign up for our free monthly sort of group coaching Q&A that we're doing for everyone, so that you can start learning how to apply these particular things into your everyday conversations. All right, I think we have a few more minutes for questions. John, do we have any other questions from audience or things that came up for you as we were going through this?
Oh my gosh, Carole. First off, I just want to say I've read a lot of sales books. I've seen a lot of sales presentations, and this presentation really hit home for me because it was less about the process of it and more really about thinking about how to do it differently and reflecting on how your mental and emotional and spiritual state affects the sale process. And and that's, it's subtle what you're talking about here. And I think it really reflects your transition in your life, because you have done this kind of process in your health journey. And I think that's what really informed this book in many ways, because it took you to rethink the way you see things, for you to redo your process. And I love the structure of the way you get people to talk and speak, to open up, so that you could learn about what their needs are and then address them, and then reaffirm them at the close to make sure that you have connection with them. And then finally, I love that you are donating 10% to Barb's scholarship, because Barb Giamanco was a dear friend of all of ours, and a teacher and inspiration to so many. And I first off, I clicked your QR code, and I'm in the process of buying my own copy, because I want to dig deeper. I really, Carole, this was different in so many deep ways, and I really dug it. We have a ton of questions. So let's go to the sheet, see if they've transcribed them into there. So go ahead, Carole, I'll let you start with the ones that resonate with you.
Yeah, I really love Joseph's question. Oh, please tell us when they will be able to watch this again. Pretty please. Yes, we're going to have a recording, I believe, that goes out to everyone. So thank you for that, Joseph. And then Matthew asked, I'd like an illustration based on your goals and the kind of help you need. You know what, Matthew, the best thing you can do for me is buy the book, review the book, tell other people about the book, because I really want to change the way that sales is perceived, both inwardly and externally, because I believe that when we start implementing science and data into the sales community, that we will start to shift the perception of pushy, slimy, and sleazy to trusted advisor. My little soapbox moment is, if you think of sales today as being in the Renaissance age, like if you think of the Renaissance, the medical profession prior to the Renaissance was not seen as trusted advisors. They were seen as religious fanatics. Yeah, they were butchers, because they blindly followed the teachings of a few. They were seen as these religious fanatics because they were trying to con people into buying whatever thing, leeches or whatever they wanted. It wasn't until they started introducing science, dissection, anatomy into the medical profession that it started to gain a level of respectability, because they got results. And that's where we are in sales today. And so that's why I wrote this book, because we talk so much about what we should do, but we don't talk about why we don't do the things that we know that we should, and how that gets in our way. And the other part of this is that, like to your point, John, our personal lives, how we live our personal lives, is a direct impact on how we live our sales lives. And the things that we do in our day-to-day is impacting us in our day-to-day sales conversations. I mentioned that I do a lot of work with Harvard MBA students and coaching them in sales. And one of the things that I tell them is, look, the more you can practice these kinds of questioning techniques and being able to control yourself in those conversations, the better you're going to be when you get into a sales conversation. So practice on everybody around you. It doesn't take much to be in a present moment and start asking open-ended questions about people, whether it's your waiter, whether it's your Uber driver, the grocery store clerk. Everyone around you is an opportunity for you to practice these techniques. Tom also asks, and this is such a great question, what is the biggest blind spot that I see for sales leaders that could have the biggest impact on a turnaround in performance? In the book, and I don't write about this until the last chapter, so I'm so glad that you asked this question, Tom. One of the biggest blind spots and things that leaders overlook is that what you're trying to do with your sales teams is create a behavior change. And any kind of a behavior change, whether it's weight loss or running a marathon or changing your sales acumen, all starts with what your personally meaningful goals are to make that change happen. See, psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when we're at odds with ourselves, when the reality and our perception collide. Maybe we see ourselves as good salespeople, but our buyers are ignoring us. That creates a cognitive dissonance where reality does not line up with our expectations of ourselves. And what's interesting about cognitive dissonance is that when you have a personally meaningful goal, researchers have found that you will do whatever it takes ethically to bridge the gap between your cognitive dissonance of where you are and where you want to be when you have a goal. When you don't have a personally meaningful goal, you'll make excuses. It's the economy's fault. Our pricing is too tough. The competition is too stiff. We'll make excuses and double down on what we believe in order to justify the reality of things. I mean, you can see this in our last presidential election when one of the candidates refused to admit that he lost and all of the things that happened. That is an extreme example of cognitive dissonance where you cannot abide by the reality and your perception. In order to overcome this in your salespeople, start your conversations, your coaching relationships with them by understanding what is their personally meaningful goal. In fact, in that data analysis of the 2.3 million salespeople, I found that salespeople who had personally meaningful goals, which were written down, that they had an action plan, that they had shared with someone and made regular reports to, get ready for this. They were 298% more likely to be elite top salespeople because they had 32% more skills. Personally meaningful goals are the things that are going to drive your salespeople to go above and beyond what they've ever done before. And here's the thing of it, is that when you help them to set those personally meaningful goals, maybe it's that they want to buy a house or take care of their family or travel because it means something personal to them. When you go through that exercise with them, you're building trust and rapport with them, but then you're also building a way to keep them accountable to something that isn't their quota. It's what it means, their personal quota. I often say that meeting quota is kind of like getting up in the morning and being excited to pay your taxes and student loans. Nobody wakes up in the morning with joy in their heart to do that. They're like, okay, I have to do it, but only because I have to and I don't want to get in trouble or lose my job. But a personal quota, the going above and beyond, making a few extra calls because I want to send more money to my parents or put my kids through college or do this renovation to the house or take a family trip, that's going to mean more to them than anything else you can do. So thank you so much for that question. It's a great question. Let's see. Biggest blind spot, we just answered that. Thank you so much for that, Tom. I think the other biggest blind spot too, Tom, is we had mentioned earlier is understanding that the beliefs and mindsets that your managers have will directly impact your team. You know that phrase, as goes the manager, so goes the teams. That's why I did that analysis to find out what are the impacts that managers have. How is it that we are sometimes creating the very problems that we're trying to solve for? And that's a perfect example. So thank you for that. All right. I think that's all of our questions.
May I quickly interject, Carole? For all of the women out there listening, there's an organization called Women Sales Pros that I've been fortunate enough to be involved with. And Carole, I think you're a member of that group as well, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
And when I first got in sales, I read a book called I don't know, it's by Tom Hopkins. It was a sales book, and there's just a different mindset that I just think that women bring to the world that is so unique, and I'm not going to say it's more emotional or spiritual or human, but I think it's all of the above. Yeah. That is so powerful. That and it's really all about connecting with the buyer in a way that gets them to open up to you so you can solve their problems. You're helping them become a better version of themselves. And when you say it's sales isn't something you do to somebody, it's that you do with them. That's
Hmm.
it. That
Hmm.
really is it. Carol, I don't know if I ever told you the story, but when I was 41 years old, the year after I sold gold mine and retired, I got a head tumor and almost died. And I went through the medical journey of getting healed, but also went through a spiritual journey. And I came to the conclusion that I'm on this planet to grow my soul in the brief period of time that I'm here. And the best way for me to do that is by helping other people grow theirs. And ultimately, that is really the epitome of a good salesperson is you're there to grow as many people as you can by
Yes.
helping them to achieve their dreams. And I think that the greats have already all said it, and all the authors today are just regurgitating the greats. Zig Ziglar, right? The more people you help grow, the more you will grow, and that's really what it's all about. And I really think that this presentation, your book, um, really layers on top of those greats in a way that is uniquely different. And I just want to thank you for
Thanks.
this time, this presentation, and being my friend.
Thank you so much, Jon. And you're absolutely right. One of the phrases I said in the monthly group coaching that we're doing for those that purchase the book, one of the things that I said last month was, you can't be a good salesperson if you're not a good person. And it was kind of like a dead, pin dropping for a moment there. But you're right. There's a lot of the great Zig Ziglar that talk about, the putting others first, putting, relationships first. And one of the things that I always found missing from a lot of the books is, yes, we all understand that, but how do we do that? What specifically do we need to change? And how is that impacting our ability to be able to do these things? Like when I started going through this work myself, because I've gone through this process too, one of the things that my kids said to me was, you know what, Mom, you yell a lot less than you used to. And so the work that I did to work on my sales mindsets was affecting my personal relationships in ways that I never would have thought before. My husband and I just
Yeah.
celebrated 15 years of marriage, and I don't think we would have made it this far if I hadn't started making some of these changes. And it ends up infecting the rest of your family and friends. As you become a bigger, better person, it influences those around you in positive ways as well. And so, to your
Yeah.
point too about women sales pros, like I have these conversations with Lori Richardson all the time about, changing the dynamic of sales. And she believes that we need to get more women in sales to change the profession. I also believe that,
Yeah.
and that when we get more women in sales, it will change the dynamics of the profession. And I think that it's absolutely paramount that we do that sooner rather than later.
So all you ladies out there that are listening, go check out that organization because it's filled with powerful, beautiful, strong, intelligent leaders. And Carole, thanks again. Thank you to the Nimble team that put this together. Thank you to the audience that spent the time with us today. And Carole, so you're saying if I buy the book today, I get to have a monthly a powwow with you and your community?
Yes, absolutely. So when you go to the book order page, which is
Can you bring
here.
that slide up again? Yeah.
So when you go to that book order page, underneath the order links, you'll see a form for you to
Yeah.
sign up for that monthly group coaching session. We're planning to doing it for the rest of this year, but it's becoming so popular, I think I might continue it indefinitely. A lot of it too, though, full disclosure, I love going and like seeing everybody with their books and their sticky notes and their highlights and, how do I apply this into my day-to-day? Because at the end of the day, a lot of us, we're doing this kind of work, whether it's writing books or doing presentations, because we want to have a positive impact. And that's what my hope is for this book, is that someone else can learn from all of the mistakes and struggles that I went through, and that they can get a leg up on it faster rather than sooner.
Okay, well, I'm sold. I'm looking forward to our monthly collaboration. And by the way, I love that color blue on the book.
Me too.
It's a beautiful, beautiful color. We're
Thank
picking paints for our new remodel here, and I'm constantly looking at colors.
Yeah, I
So
hear.
thank you, everybody. Keep for those that aren't using Nimble today, go sign up. If you do decide to become a subscriber, there's a code Jon40. You get 40% off your first 3 months. Connect with Carole and I. Let us know how we can help you grow. the reason we do what we do is to really serve you. There's a lot of things that you could do in your life, and I often try to tell people life isn't about making money. It's about making memories out of the moments with people you dig, and this has been a great moment. Um, uh, and so, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jon. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Happy selling.
Adios.